On Press Perspective today, we touch upon a number of intriguing revelations of the past week related to Korea's post-independence movement against Japanese colonial rule, as well as the surge in marriages between South Korean men and Japanese women in recent times. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Friday, July 18th here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. Today, we touch upon a number of fun facts from history, in society, and on style. For this, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Thanks. Great to be here as always.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with the pundit's take on the day's discussion. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, Sunny.
Right. Thomas, a while back, I remember, we talked about how your agency, UPI, was the first foreign news media to report about the Korean War. A historian now says that your news agency, UPI, was also among the first to report about Korea's March 1st movement. Let's start with that.
Right, so this is something that has just been coming out recently, and some new research by, it's called the Northeast Asian History Foundation, which is kind of a state-funded research organization here. And they've come across, newly digitized old newspapers from the U.S. And apparently there was some earlier reporting on the Korean independence movement than had traditionally been believed. For the longest time, the original report that has been widely cited was by a guy named Albert Wilder Taylor, who was based here, and he had written something that was published on March 13th. But according to, I think these old archives just hadn't been digitized, and they were doing a search. And there's actually some reporting that was from March 10th that was datelined in San Francisco, and it had apparently come from, there had been some contact by, it was a Korean preacher, I guess based in Shanghai, that had telegraphed some information to Koreans that were in San Francisco, and somehow this got picked up, and UPI, I guess it was called UP back then, United Press, was one of the ones that ran with it. I don't know if there's determined like which was the very first thing. So just a little, like as you said, it's a sort of fun fact. It just changed. It's a bit of history that wasn't known. And I think that was just a brief kind of outline of what was going on. Really the first on the ground reporting that was datelined, I think from here as well as Beijing, was this Albert Wilder Taylor report, and he had done that for AP, Associated Press, and famously ran in the New York Times, and he had gotten the information, as the story goes, had found the Korean Declaration of Independence, which had been hidden in his wife's hospital bed. She was giving birth around that time, and I guess some of the Korean independence activists figured, this would be a safe place to hide it. Like the Japanese, who were the colonial occupiers at the time, wouldn't go necessarily searching in a foreigner's hospital room. So that's the story of how he came across this information. He went on to report, from what was happening here, the protests, movements, the crackdown from the Japanese. And he also has some connection to UPI. I think it's not sure. There was some information that he was a correspondent for them, but then that seems to have been disputed. Now I think they're maybe asking, looking into that as well again. But he has a house here in Seoul that's become a museum as well that people can visit, called the Dilkusha House. So yeah, that's that. Right.
And Colin, I wonder, how significant have such foreign reports about turbulent events here in South Korea been in perhaps shaping the country's democracy, do you think?
I think they've gotten more significant all the time. Back in 1919, Korea was not, there was no newsboy in Manhattan saying, extra, extra, Korea rebels against Japan. I mean, there wasn't a big awareness of Korea in the West. There was a big awareness of Japan. And I think editorially as well, a desire maybe not to provoke Japan, which was a fast-rising, industrializing, militarizing power. So having seen what happened with World War I, I feel like let's not let's not provoke the rising power that is Japan. In any case, this is a matter internal to Asia, and some of the commentators who were aware of Korea at the time, travelers who went there from the West, would say, well, there was no modernization program in place in Korea, so Japan just happens to be the one who has to do it, I guess. There was a sense that it was forcible, but there was not really a sense that we have now of what was wrong with that process, what was wrong with Japan's actions on the whole. It was sort of out of sight, out of mind for a lot of Westerners. But I think the example that comes more to mind is the reporting that was done during the Gwangju incident, uprising, massacre, what you want to call it what you will, in May 1980, and it was a German reporter, an incident dramatized in the film Taxi Unjonsa, or A Taxi Driver. But foreign reporting there's been more and more all the time here, and especially during the sort of transition to democracy in the 80s, it was always, how to put it, always a fairly sensitive matter amid the powers that be in Korea, and the public as well. I mean, we can recall the story of the many stories surrounding the 1988 Olympics, and there was one incident where a boxer who lost a match didn't concede defeat, and the TV cameras recorded that and just displayed that to America, and there was anger here, you know, why? America, why did you show that to people? Why didn't you cover that up for us? So it gets complex, but I would say nowadays it's not. Nowadays, it's sort of, the reporting that's done in Korea is important, but it's not, the ruling class is not quite so sensitive about it as they once were. Now that everybody accepts Korea as a democracy, as one of the advanced nation states of the world, not quite so much hangs in the balance for its reputation, but there's still a lot of concern about that nonetheless.
Right. Thomas, let's move on to another interesting piece of information, this time on the social front, also concerning South Korea and Japan. Now, findings as of last year show a substantial surge in the number of marriages between South Korean men and Japanese women over the past decade, actually. What more can you add first?
Right, so last year we saw an increase of 40% in marriages between Japanese women and Korean men. It was a total of 1,176, according to Statistics Korea, and that's a big jump. It was part of an overall trend, I think, where marriages in general have been on the rise in Korea, and foreign marriages were up 5% or so from the year prior. So some of it is catching a trend. I mean, still the largest groups of foreign women married to Korean men are from Vietnam, China, and I think Thailand, which are more groups that have migrated here and are based here. But yeah, the Japan-Korea thing is definitely an interesting trend. I mean, and it has been on the rise over the past few years, and I think, a decade or so in the past, it was also higher, went down. I think certainly COVID and some other things were factors in the years between. But it also, I think, rises and falls a bit with the relationship between Japan and South Korea, which has been, historically, obviously tumultuous, and but has had thaws and freezes, and we're currently in a period where, just from a political standpoint, the relationship has gotten better, but even a few years ago, there was that, Japan boycott movement, and I think that did actually impact, the amount, just sort of the travel back and forth from the country, so that had an impact. But, at the same time, person to person, Korea, obviously, I think the main factors that have been kind of that are attributing to this rise, according to observers and the statistics agency itself, is popularity of K-culture has just obviously been on the rise globally, and that applies to Japan as well. A few articles I read pointed out there are these specific YouTube channels that have gotten really popular that feature couples where it's a Korean man and a Japanese woman, and have, some of them have millions of viewers. There was also a Japanese drama, like a comedy romance called I Love You, like E-Y-E-I. I don't know if you've heard about this, and I guess it was quite popular, where it's based on it's a Korean woman who or sorry, a Japanese woman who has the ability to read people's minds and feels like she can't find love because of that. The thoughts of other people are too intrusive, but she meets a Korean guy who thinks in Korean, so she can't really understand him, which is an interesting thing that's an attraction. But I think he also comes across as a very straightforward and innocent type of character, and she falls in love with him. So, these little factors may give a boost to the idea of it, but there feels like there's something there in the relationship that maybe an impression of Korean men that Japanese women have picked up over the years as being, attractive or good partners. I mean, I've heard this kind of anecdotally here and there, even before this, this latest statistical thing, which, I don't know enough to explain like where it comes from or why, but certainly, it falls in line with, I think, the growing just appeal that Korea has globally.
Right. Staying with this, Colin, do you suppose the Korean wave has played a big part in the number of marriages between Korean men and Japanese women?
Specifically that, but it probably hasn't hurt. But one of the findings in these statistics from 2024 that intrigued me was that 1 in 10 marriages are now international marriages in Korea. And of course, that includes marriages between 2 ethnic Koreans, one of whom has a foreign nationality, which is certainly not unknown here. But as Thomas says, when it's a Korean man marrying a foreign woman, which is the majority, it's about 3/4 of the cases, the wife is from Vietnam, about 30%, or after that, China, Thailand, usually Asia or Southeast Asia. If you look at the foreign husbands, about 30% come from the US, such as myself, which was intriguing. And then China and Vietnam were also popular countries there. So the composition demographically is maybe not necessarily what people would expect when they imagine what an international couple looks like. But if you look at the statistics, then you think, well, there is that sort of cultural image in Korea of the son of a rural family who struggles to get married, and so he marries a woman from Vietnam or Thailand or the Philippines. And so common was it seen to be that when I first came to Korea about 10 years ago, there were a lot of shows, reality shows, where they would send the foreign daughter-in-law with her mother-in-law, her Korean mother-in-law, to the daughter-in-law's home country and make them travel around for a week and work out their problems, because they would always, the stereotype is they don't get along that well, partially for language problems, partially because the foreigner doesn't understand the traditions or doesn't know what's expected of her. So this show is pretty entertaining, I think. And I don't know if that sort of thing still happens on TV, but yeah, as Thomas says, it's become very, to use a popular term, normalized. These YouTube channels like Sakura Memories or whatever, they'll focus on the specific culture clash. I think they live in Japan, but also there's YouTube channels where it's an American woman and a Korean man, or all the combinations are being tried on YouTube right now, I can assure you. And I think it's a far cry from stories I hear from an American friend who's been here since the mid-'80s. He said, when he was going around in those days with his wife, with the woman who became his wife, we'd have to stand like 3 feet apart walking down the street. If we showed any sign we were together, there'd be trouble. And that certainly is not something you see on the streets of Seoul in any case. So that's changed.
Right, it has. Thomas, moving forward, one recent article claims that there is a very easy way of pinpointing a South Korean on vacation, most likely on the beach, because Koreans wear rash guards. What are your thoughts? And is this tendency, do you suppose, a reflection of our cultural practices, or?
It's definitely something I can, anecdotally attest to for sure, being at beaches here in Korea as well, or even swimming pools.
Is this what you see on the beaches here in Korea as well, then?
I've noticed it, yeah. I didn't, looking further into it, there is data that the sales of these rash guards are going up. And just, rash guards are they're basically worn by surfers generally. They're sort of, tight but body suit, spandex type of top. Sometimes they're full body suits. And clearly it's a trend among Korean beachgoers, and has been for a while. I think, I was trying to look back to when did this trend start, and I saw some reports from 2015 that were noting that this was becoming a popular thing. And, I think some of it is just reflects Asia in general. A lot of Asian cultures, if you go to a beach, even in Southeast Asia and Vietnam or something, you tend to see the women there cover up more so than you would see the US or like South America or maybe in Europe. And some of that is cultural, kind of a cultural modesty that still exists. Obviously, there is a different attitude towards the sun and wanting to be tan-skinned. I mean, that's a big reason. I mean, that's something you see certainly just walking the streets of Seoul. When waiting for the light to change, there are these big umbrellas, on the corners of a lot of streets that people will be clustering under to stay out of the sun, even for 5 seconds sometimes. So that's definitely part of it. But the rash guard thing is kind of a Korea-specific version of that, and it's hard to say exactly why it is, but I mean, I think some of it is, certainly you do see in Korea when a trend takes off, a lot of people will kind of adopt it. There is a faddishness, I would say, to Korean culture in general. And, it seems to kind of vibe with the sort of the aesthetic attitude that a lot of people have. I mean, you see a lot of kind of like athletic wear, athleisure as a casual thing. So it seems to fit that. It's modest. People in some of these articles, you read talking about why they might wear it. I mean, it's especially something like a beach might be a mixed environment where there's families, so it's kind of seen as modest. Maybe if it's just, teens, 20-somethings going out themselves, it's not that people don't ever wear bikinis or one-piece bathing suits, but this is kind of something in a more mixed environment that might seem more proper to wear. But yet they're still form-fitting. It's not like it's a giant sort of baggy thing you're wearing over yourself. So, and I think there's a stylishness as it's gotten more popular. There's kind of a stylishness to it too. You see different prints, even different kinds of cuts of these things. So, it's taken on a life of its own in a very Korean way, and it's hard to say exactly that this is the specific reason why, but it feels like a Koreanizing, a Korean version of a kind of a bigger trend in Asia that just taps into this sense of style and this sense of kind of functionality and comfort, but still wanting to look kind of good at the same time.
And Colin, what's your take on this trend for rash guards here in the country?
Glad to learn the name of these things. I've seen them and I never knew what to call them. They're sort of wetsuit-looking shirts, but you do see them everywhere. And even if you go abroad and you're at a beach and you see some travelers from Asia wearing them, they're probably Korean, much as if you see couples dressed the same, they're probably Korean. As Thomas says, it's a trend-sensitive society. And when some trend happens, it's safe to get with it. There's, as you say, the Korean mentality, I think, is reflected in this word that comes up in coverage of this trend and certain others, 문난템. 문난템 is 문난한 item. Item is item, like the English word. 문난하다 is an adjective meaning it's safe, or there's nothing obviously wrong with it. So if you have something 문난해, then you're safe. No one's going to criticize you for it. And so if everybody's wearing these rash guards and you have one too, you're safe. And they're not very revealing, so that's safe as well. Although when listening to Thomas, I recall when I first came to Korea, I noticed very different styles of dress from the US, of course, and women would never show their shoulders. That's changing, but in those days, you would never see that. And you'd hear like, oh, they still dress modestly here. But then you look down at what they were wearing below, like on the bottom half, and it didn't seem very modest to me. So the rules were different. Like you can show as much leg as possible, like sky's the limit, but if you show the shoulder, kind of the reverse of the US at that time. So these trends can change too. I don't know what's going to be the 문난템 2 years from now, even 1 year from now. No one knows. So that's why, cash in on these trends while you can.
One question though, Colin, you were saying these couple clothing or these couples wearing the same clothes, it's not a thing in the US then? Is it just a Korean thing?
No, I think a lot of American couples of whatever ethnicity, if they step out in the morning and they find they're wearing a similar shirt, or they look a little too matchy-matchy, as they say, they change. Like you don't want to be seen to be doing that. So I think this is really Korea only. I don't even see it in Japan very much. So
even if you're on your honeymoon?
I don't know any American who's done that. I'm sure there probably is somebody. It's been done. I mean, America's a big place, and there are people who you can find individuals who enjoy that. It just has a sort of bad. It's not 문난해. I'll put it that way.
Right.
There's no 문난템 in there.
Right. Thomas, back on the local front, the Blue House, it's supposed to close its doors to the public, I believe, come August 1st. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Right, so it was open to the public only briefly. This is the presidential residence and office, or has been since 1948 until 2022, when former President Yoon Suk-yeol decided to move out, and he ended up moving to what was the former Defense Ministry for the office, and moved to Hanam-dong for his residence. And now current President Lee Jae-myung is moving back. So it had been turned into a museum and just kind of an open ground, a kind of a public urban park in this interim period. And for so many Koreans, it was a chance to visit this place that most had not really had an opportunity to see. It's interesting in that it encapsulates so much of the complicated history of the country, of the presidential office, all in this one building. The reason that Yoon gave for moving, and this is, other presidents have also talked about wanting to relocate. I mean, the president before him, Moon Jae-in, also had discussed it. But Yoon said that he wanted to bring the president's office closer to the people. And there is something about the Blue House that is, it's very grand. It does seem very fitting as a the head of state sort of residence and office. But, it also does have this feeling of being removed from the public. And, the security around it was always quite high. And it's not the sort of place you could just sort of stroll up to. And and it also symbolizes this idea that Korea's presidency, the office itself, has often been called an imperial presidency, where there's been so much power, invested in the office, and often to not great effect. That's another reason that people certainly, speculated about why Yoon wanted to move, and other presidents maybe in the past, is this idea that it's got bad energy. Literally, people have said it's got bad feng shui, this kind of geomancy, element. But at the same time, I think it also traditionally was thought of as a place that had really good feng shui, which is why it's behind the Gyeongbokgung Palace, and those locations were chosen for a reason. But a lot of bad things have happened to people who have been president in Korea. I think something 9 out of 14 have either been impeached, removed, exiled. Some have come to violent ends. So, it's an office fraught with a lot of sort of history that's not so great. So I think that was an element of it as well. But at the same time, the public, I think, wanted to see, it was a mixed opinion about moving away. And now that Lee Jae-myung is moving back, there was a poll recently that about 60% wanted him to move back. So, it really sort of symbolizes a lot about the complication of the presidency, and it's just the complicated history. It goes back to the Japanese were there, and this location goes back to the Joseon dynasty. So it's one building that has a lot going on with it, and on both sides of sort of good and bad.
Right. Well, for our viewers here in South Korea who have yet to visit the Blue House, it's going to stay open for the next 2 weeks then, right, Thomas?
Yes.
All right. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thomas, as always, thank you very much for your insights. And Colin, thank you very much for your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Right. That brings us to the end of this week's editions of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend, and see you same time next Monday.